The opulent crystal chandelier cast a kaleidoscope of light across the polished marble floor, reflecting in the nervous sweat beating on Xing Yanchuan's brow. The air, thick with the cloying scent of lilies and the hushed whispers of curious onlookers, pressed in on him. He could feel the telltale itch starting, a prickling sensation that spread from his wrist up his arm. Damn! Just the proximity was enough. This time, he thought grimly, his jaw tightening. Grandma's getting bolder. He caught a glimpse of them, one in a demure pastel dress, the other radiating a more aggressive confidence in a scarlet power suit. Both, however, were radiating an aura of expectation, of matrimonial ambition that made his stomach churn. This charade was getting old. He needed an out. Mr. Sheng, something bad has happened. The old lady is here again. This time she brought 2 girls with her. You can't escape this blind date. Stop, Grandma, I'm leaving first. The hurried whisper of his assistant, Li Wei, barely registered over the rising tide of panic. Escape. He needed to escape. He mumbled a curt acknowledgement, his eyes scanning the room for an exit, any exit. He turned sharply, feigning interest in a particularly gaudy abstract painting, subtly angling himself towards the French doors leading to the terrace. He could practically taste the freedom, the fresh air uncontaminated by perfume. The thought sent a shiver down his spine. Just a few more steps, Yanchuan. There you are, my dear boy. His grandmother's voice, deceptively sweet yet laced with steel, cut through the air like a surgeon's scalpel. Damn! So close. The itch intensified, blossoming into a full-blown rash on his arm where he'd brushed against a passing waiter's sleeve. He cursed internally. This allergy was a curse. A bizarre, inexplicable curse that made him allergic to women. Not all women, mind you, just those who exuded a certain eagerness. An eagerness he'd come to associate with marriage traps like this. He forced a smile, a strained, brittle thing. Grandma, what a pleasant surprise. The words felt like ash in his mouth. Surprise? Nonsense. I told you I'd be here, she retorted, her eyes glinting with amusement. She gestured towards her companions, 2 women who now wore expressions of carefully cultivated shyness. These lovely young ladies are eager to make your acquaintance. His stomach lurched. Eager. That was the word. He could practically feel the hives erupting. He needed an out. Now. He feigned a sudden cough, clutching his chest dramatically. Grandma, I'm not feeling well. Perhaps another time. His grandmother's expression softened, but only fractionally. Yanchuan, you've been saying that for months. Don't you think it's time you settled down? These young ladies are from excellent families, he tuned her out, his mind racing. He needed a distraction. A miracle. Anything. His gaze drifted past his grandmother, landing on a young woman standing hesitantly near the entrance. She clutched a worn handbag, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and was that desperation. She was young, perhaps a student, her simple clothes a stark contrast to the polished elegance of the room. She was also, crucially, radiating absolutely zero matrimonial ambition. An idea, reckless and desperate, began to form in his mind. He straightened, ignoring the insistent throbbing in his arm. Grandma, he said, his voice regaining some of its usual authority. I believe I see someone I know. He strode towards the young woman, each step a gamble. He reached her, his heart pounding against his ribs. He could sense her confusion, her fear. Perfect. He offered her his arm, a gesture both polite and possessive. Wei Wei, he said, using a name he'd plucked from the air. What are you doing here? Wu Yuewei stared at the man before her, her mind a whirl of confusion and terror. Wei Wei. He knew her name. She'd never seen him before in her life. Just moments ago, she'd been steeling herself to confront the aloof, intimidating Mr. Sheng, the man rumored to be the father of her child. Now, he was standing before her, his arm extended, his eyes holding a strange mixture of calculation and something else she couldn't quite decipher. The opulent surroundings, the curious stares of the other patrons, the sheer absurdity of the situation threatened to overwhelm her. But beneath the fear, a spark of defiance ignited. She was here for a reason, a desperate, terrifying reason. And this unexpected turn of events, however bizarre, might be her only chance. She took a deep breath, her hand trembling slightly as she slipped it into his. Chuanyi, she murmured, the words a hesitant echo of the name she'd heard whispered in hushed tones. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was madness. Utter madness. But what choice did she have? She felt his arm tense beneath her hand, just for a fleeting moment, before he resumed his composed facade. He turned towards his grandmother, his expression carefully neutral. "Grandma, this is Weiwei, Afriend. I apologize, but we have some urgent matters to discuss." He didn't wait for a response, steering her towards the exit, leaving behind a scene of stunned silence. As they stepped out into the relative quiet of the street, Weiwei risked a glance at him. His profile, sharp and defined against the afternoon light, betrayed nothing of his thoughts. He seemed a man carved from ice, remote and untouchable. Yet, the fleeting tension she'd felt in his arm hinted at something more, a vulnerability carefully concealed beneath the polished surface. What game was he playing? And more importantly, how could she play it to her advantage? She was pregnant, alone, and facing a future more daunting than she could have ever imagined. This encounter, this charade, was her lifeline. She had to tread carefully. "Chuanyi," she began, her voice barely a whisper. He cut her off, his gaze fixed on the street ahead. "We'll discuss this later. Somewhere more private." His voice was low, laced with an unspoken warning. He hailed a cab, the sleek black car a symbol of the vast chasm that separated their worlds. As he opened the door for her, their eyes met for a brief, charged moment. In his, she saw a flicker of something she couldn't quite name. Resignation? Or perhaps, just perhaps, a hint of reluctant understanding. She climbed into the car, the leather cool against her skin, the scent of luxury a stark contrast to the anxieties churning within her. The door closed behind her, sealing her into the unknown, the uncertain future that now, inexplicably, was intertwined with this enigmatic, powerful man. The antiseptic smell of the hospital clung to Sheng Yanchuan like a second skin, a stark contrast to the expensive cologne he wore. He stood rigidly by the window, his gaze fixed on the manicured lawn below, a carefully constructed mask of indifference shielding the simmering irritation beneath. His grandmother's latest matchmaking fiasco had ended predictably: hives, shortness of breath, and a swift retreat to the sterile sanctuary of the hospital. This charade has to stop, he thought, rubbing the lingering itch on his neck. Grandma's persistence is bordering on the absurd. Yanchuan, a saccharine voice broke through his thoughts. Aunt Fong, his father's younger sister, glided into the room, her smile as brittle as the hospital tiles. He knew that smile. It was the precursor to a request, one that invariably involved money. "Your father's bills," she began, her voice trailing off, the unspoken plea hanging heavy in the air. Yanchuan turned, his expression unreadable. He recognized the tactic, a delicate dance of familial obligation and veiled manipulation. He had seen it countless times. "Aunt Fong," he said, his voice smooth, devoid of any warmth, "my father's compensation. You're thinking of taking my money again, right?" Aunt Fong's smile faltered, replaced by a look of wounded innocence. "Yanchuan, how can you say that? It's for your father. His health." He cut her off, his patience wearing thin. His health is a consequence of his own choices. I've covered his expenses time and again, Aunt Fong. When does it end? The unspoken question hung in the air. When does your leeching stop? Before Aunt Fong could muster a response, a commotion erupted outside the room. Raised voices, the clatter of a metal cart, and a sharp cry of distress pierced the sterile quiet. Yanchuan felt a prickle of annoyance. More chaos. A young woman stumbled into the room, her face pale, eyes wide with panic. She clutched a crumpled hospital bill in her hand, her knuckles white. "Hello, Wu Jiang family, right?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I already owe more than 5,000 yuan for hospitalization. If you don't pay, we will stop taking the medicine." Yanchuan watched her, his initial annoyance giving way to a detached curiosity. She was young, barely out of her teens, her clothes simple, her demeanor frantic. He could practically smell the desperation emanating from her. Another casualty of life's cruel lottery, he thought. Aunt Fong, sensing an opportunity to deflect the conversation, turned on the young woman with surprising venom. "Who are you? This is a private room. Get out." The young woman flinched but stood her ground, her gaze fixed on Yanchuan. I was told this was Mr. Wu Zhang's room. My father," her voice cracked. "My father is very sick." She looked down at the swollen belly barely concealed beneath her thin shirt. A sudden realization hit Yanchuan like a physical blow. Pregnant. Alone. Desperate. He recognized the flicker of calculation in Aunt Fong's eyes. This was a chance to shift the burden, to find a scapegoat. He knew, with a chilling certainty, what was coming next. "Yanchuan," Aunt Fong began, her voice dripping with false concern, "this poor girl, her father is ill, and she's in a delicate condition. Surely we can help." Yanchuan's jaw tightened. He saw the trap, yet he also saw the young woman's desperation. He weighed his options, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. He loathed being manipulated, yet he also couldn't ignore the genuine fear in the girl's eyes. "Damn it," he thought. "This is not my problem." But even as he thought it, he knew he couldn't simply walk away. His reputation, carefully cultivated over years, would be tarnished by association if this girl made a scene. A Sheng turning away a pregnant woman in need? The gossip rags would have a field day. He met the young woman's gaze, his expression unreadable. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice low, controlled. "Wu Wu Yue," she stammered, her eyes searching his face for a glimmer of hope. "Wu Yue," he repeated, the name rolling off his tongue like a foreign currency. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. "How much do you need?" Relief washed over Yue's face, so potent it was almost palpable. She named a sum, her voice still trembling. It was a substantial amount, enough to cover her father's immediate medical expenses. Yanchuan counted out the bills, his movements precise, deliberate. As he handed the money to Yue, he noticed the tremor in her hands. He felt a strange pang of something. Pity? Annoyance? He couldn't quite place it. This is a transaction, he reminded himself. Nothing more. "Thank you," Yue whispered, her eyes brimming with tears. "Thank you, Mr. Sheng Yanchuan," he said curtly. "Consider this a loan. You will repay me." He didn't add with interest. He didn't need to. The power imbalance between them was clear. Yue nodded, clutching the money as if it were a lifeline. She backed away, murmuring her gratitude, her gaze flitting between Yanchuan and Aunt Fong. As she disappeared from the room, Aunt Fong turned to Yanchuan, her smile returning, this time tinged with something akin to admiration. "Yanchuan, that was very generous of you." "Such a kind heart," he cut her off with a glacial look. Don't mistake pragmatism for generosity, Aunt Fong. I simply prefer to handle my problems efficiently. Now, if you'll excuse me, he turned back to the window, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon, his mind already calculating the next move in his ongoing chess match with his grandmother. He had extricated himself from one predicament, but he knew, with a sinking feeling, that this encounter with Wu Yuwei was far from over. The threads of their lives had tangled, and he had a feeling untangling them would prove far more complicated than he anticipated. He just didn't know how complicated yet. The opulent hotel room, suffocating in its gilded cage of luxury, pressed in on Xing Yanchuan. Crystal chandeliers cast fractured light across the polished marble floor, reflecting in the vast, unervingly empty space surrounding him. He could smell the cloying sweetness of lilies, a scent he usually appreciated, now twisting into a nauseating perfume in the tension-thick air. His fingers twitched, a nervous tic he hadn't been able to shake since his grandmother had sprung this latest matchmaking ambush. 5 women. 5. In one evening. The sheer audacity of it both amused and infuriated him. He glanced at the woman currently occupying the chaise lounge across the room. Her name, he vaguely recalled, was Lily. Or was it Lily? It hardly mattered. She was just another pawn in his grandmother's relentless game of marital chess. Her meticulously applied makeup couldn't quite mask the calculating glint in her eyes, the subtle shift in her posture that screamed ambition. He'd seen it countless times before. These women weren't interested in him, they were interested in Xing Yanchuan, the heir to the Qing Empire. A gilded cage of a different sort. And I am the bird they wish to capture. He suppressed a sigh, the faintest brush of her perfume against his skin already beginning to prickle. The allergy. His unwelcome, inconvenient curse. He had offered her champagne, a thinly veiled excuse to maintain distance. He watched her take a delicate sip, the crystal flute catching the light, and his mind raced, calculating escape routes, strategies, anything to end this charade without incident. Chuan Yi, she purred, her voice dripping with manufactured sweetness. Tell me about your work. His jaw tightened. Work. Always work. As if the vast fortune he commanded was the only thing of value he possessed. It's complicated, he deflected, already reaching for his wallet. He withdrew a thick wad of cash, far more than necessary, but the price of freedom was rarely cheap. I have an urgent matter to attend to. Please, consider this a token of my appreciation. He placed the money on the table, the crisp notes a stark contrast to the plush velvet beneath. He couldn't bring himself to meet her gaze. The slight flush rising on his neck wasn't entirely due to his allergy. Shame, a prickly, unwelcome emotion, coiled in his stomach. He hated this transactional dance, this reduction of human interaction to a monetary exchange. But what choice do I have? He turned to leave, relief flooding him, a palpable wave washing over his tense muscles. But the door swung open before he could reach it, revealing his Aunt Fong, her face a mask of strained pleasantries. Of course, she's here. His grandmother's ever-present watchdog. Chuan Yi, leaving so soon. Aunt Fong's voice, though seemingly light, held an undercurrent of steel. He could practically hear the unspoken reprimand. Another failed attempt. Another disappointment. He forced a smile, a tight, brittle thing. A business emergency, he repeated, his voice clipped. He could feel his allergy flaring, the phantom touch of the woman's perfume lingering in the air like a toxic cloud. He needed to get out. Now. He strode towards the door, but Aunt Fong's voice stopped him. Wait, Chuan Yi. There's someone I'd like you to meet. He closed his eyes briefly, steeling himself. Another one? Surely not. He opened them to see a young woman standing hesitantly behind Aunt Fong. She was small, almost swallowed by the oversized coat she wore, her face pale and drawn. Her eyes, wide and dark, held a flicker of fear, a stark contrast to the calculating ambition he had seen in the others. She clutched a worn handbag tightly against her chest, her knuckles white. Different. The thought flickered through his mind, a tiny spark in the suffocating darkness. Aunt Fang ushered the young woman forward. "This is Miss Wu Yuewei," she announced, her tone subtly shifting, laced with something akin to pity. "She has something important to discuss with you." Yanchuan felt a prickle of unease. This wasn't part of the script. This wasn't another eager social climber. There was a vulnerability radiating from her, a quiet desperation that resonated with something deep within him. He noticed the slight swell beneath her coat, the gentle curve of her belly. Pregnant. The realization hit him like a physical blow. "What is this?" Before he could speak, Wu Yuewei took a tentative step forward. Her voice was barely a whisper, trembling with unshed tears. Mr. Shengai, Aunt Fang, ever the pragmatist, cut her off. "Miss Wu finds herself in a delicate situation," she explained, her gaze flitting between Yanchuan and the young woman. "And she believes you can help." She gestured towards the money still lying on the table. "Perhaps a mutually beneficial arrangement can be reached." Yanchuan stared at the money, then at Wu Yuewei, his mind reeling. This was beyond anything he had anticipated. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air thicker, charged with an unspoken tension. Mutually beneficial. What could she possibly want? "This woman touched me," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else, the realization of the contact sending a wave of discomfort through him. He could feel the familiar itch spreading across his skin. "I'm not allergic," he added, his voice laced with confusion. This wasn't the usual reaction. It was different. He glanced at Wu Yuewei again, her fear palpable, and a strange, unfamiliar protectiveness stirred within him. He looked at Aunt Fang, his gaze sharp. "Take the money," he directed, his voice low and urgent, nodding towards Wu Yuewei. "And run away." He turned abruptly, heading for the adjoining bedroom, needing to escape the suffocating atmosphere, the weight of unspoken questions pressing down on him. "Don't worry," he added, his voice tight, not bothering to look back. "Don't disturb my fun. Get out of here." The words were harsh, a shield against the swirling chaos of his thoughts. What have I just done? He closed the bedroom door behind him, the heavy click echoing the sudden, unsettling shift in his world. The sterile scent of antiseptic bit at Wu Yuewei's nostrils, a sharp contrast to the metallic tang of fear that coated her tongue. Her fingers tightened around the worn strap of her bag, the rough fabric a small comfort in the echoing vastness of the hospital waiting room. Around her, hurried footsteps and hushed voices created a disorienting symphony. "Just breathe, Wei Wei. Just breathe." The rhythmic thump of her heart against her ribs was a frantic drumbeat against the rising tide of panic. She hadn't planned on this, not any of it. The scholarship, the unexpected pregnancy, the sudden, dizzying encounter with a man who radiated power and a strange, almost palpable, aversion to her very presence. Sheng Yanchuan. Chuan Yi, as his entourage called him. The name echoed in her mind, a dissonant chord. Across the city, Sheng Yanchuan sat rigid in the back of his chauffeured car, the cool leather a stark contrast to the simmering frustration that tightened his jaw. He could still feel the phantom sting of the allergic reaction, a prickly heat spreading across his skin like wildfire. Grandmother. The mere thought of her sent a ripple of annoyance through him. Her machinations were becoming increasingly outlandish. This latest fiasco, a parade of eligible women paraded before him like prize livestock, had pushed him to the edge. He glanced at his phone, the screen flashing with a flurry of missed calls and urgent messages. His Aunt Fang was no doubt in a frenzy, trying to salvage the situation. He could practically hear her shrill voice echoing in his ears. He rubbed his temples, the beginnings of a headache throbbing behind his eyes. This has to stop. The hospital buzzed with activity. A nurse, her face etched with exhaustion, hurried past Yue, her words a-clipped, "Excuse me." Yue flinched, shrinking further into her chair. The sheer scale of the Xing family's influence was overwhelming. Within minutes of the incident, an entire wing of the hospital seemed to have been mobilized, doctors and nurses swarming like bees around a disturbed hive. They could buy and sell me 10 times over. The thought sent a shiver down her spine. She was a small fish in a very large pond, and the sharks were circling. Meanwhile, Mrs. Sheng, a formidable woman whose presence commanded attention even from a distance, barked orders into her phone. Her voice, sharp and unwavering, cut through the hushed atmosphere of the hospital corridor. "Find her. I don't care what it takes, find that girl." Her fingers, adorned with jade rings that clicked against the polished surface of her phone, tapped impatiently. She was a woman accustomed to getting her way, and this unexpected disruption to her plans was unacceptable. Yanchuan needs an heir. The Xing legacy must continue. Her resolve hardened with each passing second. The girl, whoever she was, held the key to her grandson's future, and she would not let her slip away. A flurry of phone calls ensued, a network of whispers and hushed negotiations spreading like tendrils through the city. 5 million. Silence. 10 million. She disappears. Double it. Make sure she understands the terms. The figures, astronomical to Yue, were mere trifles to the Xing family, a small price to pay for discretion and the preservation of their carefully constructed image. Each conversation, each hushed agreement, tightened the net around Yue, drawing her further into the Xing family's intricate web. Aunt Fong paced the length of Yanchuan's opulent study, her voice a frantic counterpoint to the rhythmic tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the corner. "Yanchuan, you must understand, this is a disaster. The media, the rumors your grandmother," she wrung her hands, her face a mask of worry. He remained silent, his gaze fixed on the cityscape spread out before him through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He knew the implications of his allergy, the whispers that followed him like shadows. A curse, a weakness. He clenched his jaw, the muscles in his face tight. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the innocent girl caught in the crossfire. Yue's phone buzzed, the insistent vibration a jarring intrusion on her racing thoughts. An unknown number. Hesitantly, she answered. "Hello." Her voice was barely a whisper. A smooth, professional voice on the other end delivered a concise message. "Ms. Wu, we have an offer for you. A generous offer. We understand your situation. And we are prepared to be discreet." The unspoken threat hung heavy in the air, a chilling reminder of the power she was up against. Back in his car, Yanchuan finally spoke, his voice low and dangerous. "Turn the car around." His eyes, usually cool and detached, now burned with a steely determination. He knew what he had to do. Protect her. The thought surprised him with its intensity. He barely knew the girl, yet the idea of her being crushed under the weight of his family's machinations was unbearable. The offer echoed in Yue's mind, a dizzying sum of money that could change her life forever. Enough for the baby, for a new start, a chance to escape the fear and uncertainty that had become her constant companions. But at what cost? She closed her eyes, picturing the man's face, the fleeting glimpses of vulnerability she had seen beneath his icy exterior. A flicker of something akin to empathy, a shared understanding of the suffocating pressures of family expectations. He found her in a small, deserted waiting area, her figure hunched, her face pale. She looked up as he approached, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and was that hope. He stopped before her, the distance between them charged with an unspoken tension. "Ms. Wu," he began, his voice a low rumble that resonated with an unexpected gentleness. "I have a proposition for you." The words hung in the air, pregnant with possibility, the start of a precarious alliance forged in the crucible of chaos and desperation. The biting night air nipped at Wu Yuewei's exposed skin, a stark contrast to the stifling anxiety that coiled in her stomach. The Xing family mansion loomed before her, a fortress of intimidating wealth and power. Each illuminated window seemed to mock her predicament, a cruel reminder of the chasm that separated her world from theirs. She clutched the small, worn purse in her hand, its meager contents a painful testament to her desperation. Her father, his face, etched with pain and worry, flashed before her eyes. 100 million. An astronomical sum, but the price of his life. She had to try. Taking a shaky breath, she steeled her resolve and pushed open the heavy iron gates, the metallic clang echoing in the stillness of the night. Inside, the opulent foyer hummed with a low, nervous energy. Servants scurried about, their faces tight with apprehension, clearing the remnants of the disastrous blind date debacle. Yuewei felt their curious gazes prick her skin, each glance a silent judgment. She swallowed the lump in her throat and asked for Xing Yanchuan, her voice barely above a whisper. The name, even now, tasted like bitter ash in her mouth. She found him in the library, a cavernous room lined with books she could only dream of owning. He stood by the window, his back to her, a silhouette against the city lights. The faint scent of sandalwood and something subtly metallic hung in the air his scent. He radiated an aura of cold detachment, an impenetrable wall that made her heart pound even harder. "Mr. Sheng," she began, her voice trembling slightly. He turned, his gaze sharp and piercing, taking her in from head to toe. For a fleeting moment, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a hint of weariness perhaps, or maybe even recognition. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the familiar mask of indifference. "You," he said, his voice a low, controlled rumble that sent shivers down her spine. He didn't need to elaborate. She was the unwelcome reminder of the evening's chaos. Yuewei fought the urge to shrink under his gaze. "I need to speak with you," she managed, forcing her voice to steady. "It's important." "I doubt that," he retorted, turning back to the window. The dismissal was swift and brutal. Her father's face swam before her eyes again, fueling her resolve. 100 million, she blurted out, the words hanging heavy in the air. He stiffened, turning slowly to face her again. His eyes narrowed, a dangerous glint in their depths. "Are you trying to blackmail me?" No, the denial was instinctive, even though a part of her knew it wasn't entirely true. She was desperate, and desperation could twist even the most honest intentions. "It's a proposition." Her hands clenched into fists. She had rehearsed this moment countless times, but now, facing him, the carefully constructed words crumbled. He raised an eyebrow, a silent challenge. He wasn't a man accustomed to being interrupted, let alone confronted. Yuewei could practically feel the gears turning in his mind, calculating, assessing. She took a deep breath, bracing herself. 100 million is 100 million, but I have a condition. The words hung in the air, thick with unspoken implications. Yanchuan's gaze remained fixed on her, unwavering, as if he were trying to dissect her very soul. He leaned against the mahogany desk, the casual posture a stark contrast to the tension radiating from him. Inside, he was a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. Annoyance, suspicion, and a grudging admiration for her audacity warred within him. What game was this woman playing? "Go on," he prompted, his voice a low murmur, the calm before a storm. "Help me deal with your grandma, then help me deal with those women." Yuewei's voice wavered, but she pushed on, her gaze locked with his. The words tumbled out, each syllable a step further into the unknown. This 100 million is yours. The silence that followed was deafening. The air crackled with tension, the unspoken question hanging between them. He studied her, his expression unreadable. She could feel the weight of his gaze, heavy and intense, stripping away her carefully constructed facade. Her heart pounded in her chest, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. Was this madness? Perhaps. But it was the only card she had left to play. She held her breath, waiting for his response. Her future, and her father's life, hung precariously in the balance. Yinchuan's mind raced. This woman, she was either incredibly foolish or incredibly brave. He had seen desperation before, but there was something different about her. A flicker of genuine fear in her eyes, a vulnerability that belied her audacious demand. He considered his options. He could dismiss her, throw her out, and pretend this conversation never happened. But his grandmother, he could almost hear her voice, shrill and insistent, demanding an heir. These endless parades of women, each more unsuitable than the last, were becoming unbearable. And this woman, she presented a unique solution. His gaze drifted to her abdomen, a sudden, inexplicable thought striking him. He had noticed the slight swell beneath her loose clothing, dismissed it as nervousness. Now, a different possibility, a more unsettling one, took root. "Tell me," he began, his voice low and deliberate, "why you need 100 million. Yue Wei hesitated, her hand instinctively going to her stomach. The truth was a heavy burden, a secret she had guarded fiercely. But looking into his eyes, she knew she couldn't lie. "My father," she started, her voice thick with emotion. "He needs surgery, a very expensive surgery. And she trailed off, the words catching in her throat. "You're?" he prompted, his gaze unwavering. She closed her eyes, bracing herself. "I'm pregnant." The words were barely a whisper, yet they echoed in the vastness of the library, a confession that changed everything. The opulent Qing residence, a fortress of marble and mahogany, hummed with a nervous energy. Night had fallen, draping the sprawling estate in shadows that danced with the flickering gaslights of the courtyard. Inside, the air crackled with unspoken anxieties, the aftermath of the afternoon's chaotic blind date spectacle still lingering like a phantom scent of perfume and desperation. Yinchuan, his tie loosened, his jaw tight, paced the length of his study, the faint scent of sandalwood incense doing little to soothe the throbbing vein in his temple. He could still feel the phantom itch on his skin, the lingering ghost of his allergy flaring up in the presence of so many women. His grandmother's machinations had reached a new level of absurdity. He rubbed his hand across his face, exhaustion etched deep in the lines around his eyes. He needed a solution, and he needed it fast. A sharp rap at the door announced his Aunt Fang. She entered, her face a mask of strained composure. "Chuanyi," she began, her voice hushed, "grandmother insists on seeing the young woman." Yinchuan stopped pacing, his gaze hardening. "Which one?" There were at least a dozen. The irony wasn't lost on him. His grandmother, in her relentless pursuit of an heir, had paraded a string of eligible women before him like prized show ponies, oblivious to his very real physiological aversion to their presence. Aunt Fang hesitated, her gaze flickering towards the floor. "The one dot from the hospital." The words hung heavy in the air, pregnant with unspoken implications. Yinchuan's breath hitched. The girl. The pregnant college student. Wu Yuewei. He had almost forgotten about her, lost in the whirlwind of his grandmother's manufactured chaos. His mind raced, calculating the potential fallout of this latest twist. He could refuse, of course, but his grandmother's will was ironclad. A direct confrontation would only escalate the situation, resulting in more elaborate schemes and unwanted attention. He needed a different approach, a strategic maneuver. "Fine," he said, his voice controlled, betraying none of the turmoil within. Bring her in. Aunt Fong nodded, relief washing over her features. She disappeared for a moment, returning with Yue Wei in tow. The young woman stood hesitantly in the doorway, her eyes wide with apprehension, clutching a small, worn handbag. The stark contrast between her simple attire and the lavish surroundings amplified her vulnerability. Yanchuan observed her closely, noting the slight tremor in her hands, the way her gaze darted around the room, taking in the intricate carvings and the priceless antiques. She was clearly out of her element, a lamb amongst wolves. "Hello, Madam Grandma," Yue Wei stammered, her voice barely a whisper. Yanchuan could practically feel the waves of fear radiating off her. He knew what it was like to be trapped, to be a pawn in someone else's game. He saw a flicker of his own past struggles reflected in her wide, uncertain eyes. His grandmother, seated regally in a high-backed armchair, scrutinized Yue Wei with a discerning gaze, her expression unreadable. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken expectations. Yanchuan cleared his throat, stepping forward to break the tension. "Grandmother," he began, his voice smooth and controlled, "didn't take a good look at you. You are so beautiful." He directed his words to Yue Wei, his gaze holding hers for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. He felt a strange, unfamiliar pang of something he couldn't quite place. It wasn't attraction, not in the conventional sense. It was more like recognition. A shared understanding of the precariousness of their current situation. Yue Wei's eyes widened, surprise flickering across her features. She clearly hadn't anticipated his intervention. He could almost hear the frantic whirring of her thoughts, trying to decipher his motives. He continued, his voice low and steady, "Wei and we have something to tell you." He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. His grandmother's eyebrows rose, a flicker of interest igniting in her eyes. He turned to Yue Wei, offering her a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was a silent agreement, a pact forged in the crucible of shared desperation. Yue Wei took a deep breath, her shoulders straightening slightly. "Grandmother," she began, her voice gaining a newfound strength, "Chuan Yi and Iwiri getting married." The words landed like a bombshell, shattering the tense silence. Aunt Fong gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Several servants who had lingered in the hallway exchanged shocked whispers. Yanchuan's grandmother, however, remained remarkably composed. She studied Yue Wei for a long moment, her gaze sharp and assessing. Then, a slow smile spread across her face, transforming her stern features into something almost approving. Later, after the initial shock had subsided and the family had retreated, Yanchuan found himself alone with Yue Wei in the study. The opulent room suddenly felt too large, the silence too heavy. He poured 2 glasses of brandy, offering one to Yue Wei. She accepted it with a hesitant nod, her fingers trembling slightly as she took a sip. "Don't worry," he said, his voice softer than she had heard it before. "I'll come this time. It's for you to decide." He knew she was terrified, thrust into a world of unimaginable wealth and power, burdened with a secret that could shatter her life. He understood the weight of that burden, the suffocating fear of exposure. And in that shared understanding, a strange, fragile alliance began to form. He had no illusions about the complexities of their situation, the potential pitfalls that lay ahead. But for now, in this moment of shared vulnerability, they were bound together by a common enemy and a desperate need for survival. The game had begun, and they were both players, whether they liked it or not. He watched her, the flickering candlelight casting shadows across her face, highlighting the delicate curve of her jaw, the vulnerability in her eyes. He wondered, with a flicker of unease, what the future held for them both. He knew one thing for sure, life, as he knew it, was about to change irrevocably. The relentless hum of the city was a stark contrast to the sterile quiet of Xing Yanchuan's study. Reports lay scattered across the mahogany desk, each a testament to the sprawling empire he commanded. Yet, none of it held his attention. His mind, against his will, drifted back to the girl. Wu Yuewei. Pregnant, desperate, and strangely resilient. He'd offered her a deal, a lifeline disguised as a business arrangement. It was a cold, calculated move, designed to appease his grandmother and maintain his own carefully constructed boundaries. But something about her unwavering gaze, the flicker of defiance in her eyes, had unsettled him. He rubbed his temples, a familiar tension tightening around his eyes. He couldn't afford distractions, not now, not with the Feiyang Group merger looming. Meanwhile, Wu Yuewei sat on the edge of her dorm room bed, the small space feeling even more cramped with the weight of her secret. Xing Yanchuan's offer, while unconventional, was her only viable option. The alternative facing her family's disappointment, the whispers, the judgment was unbearable. She picked up the prenatal class pamphlet, the glossy paper slick against her fingers. Ironically, it was in this haven for expectant mothers that a seed of suspicion began to sprout. A casual conversation, overheard snippets of worried whispers, a recurring theme: hair loss, brittle nails, unusual skin rashes. All symptoms she herself had experienced in recent weeks. A chilling thought crossed her mind. Could it be the shampoo? The Feiyang Group's new organic line, the one Xingshi Group was about to acquire. A knot of unease tightened in her stomach. The Sheng household buzzed with the remnants of the day's chaos. Aunt Fong bustled about, overseeing the cleanup, while Mrs. Sheng held court in the drawing room, regaling a captive audience with tales of Yanchuan's disastrous blind dates. He listened with detached amusement, the familiar litany of complaints washing over him. He knew his grandmother meant well, but her methods were archaic. His phone vibrated, a message from Wu Yuewei. He hesitated, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. What now? He opened the message. A single sentence: I need to see you. It's about Feiyang. That night, the prenatal class felt less like a sanctuary and more like a pressure cooker. Each shared symptom resonated with Wu Yuewei, confirming her growing suspicion. She excused herself, the fluorescent lights of the hallway blurring as she rushed towards the nearest convenience store. She needed proof, something tangible to present to Xing Yanchuan. Her hands trembled as she scanned the shelves, finally locating the familiar green bottle: Feiyang's organic shampoo. She purchased several bottles, a frantic energy propelling her. Back in her dorm room, she meticulously compared the ingredients list with online research articles, cross-referencing every chemical compound. Hours melted away, the digital glow of her laptop illuminating her determined face. Finally, she found it. A seemingly innocuous ingredient, hidden amongst a list of botanical extracts. A preservative, recently flagged for potential harmful side effects. The pieces clicked into place. Feiyang, in their rush to market, had overlooked a crucial safety test. This wasn't just a bad batch, it was a systemic problem. She immediately called Xing Yanchuan. He answered on the third ring, his voice laced with a hint of impatience. Wu Yuewei. It's late. She took a deep breath, pushing down the wave of anxiety. Mr. Sheng, I've found something. It's about the shampoo. It contains a harmful ingredient. It's why everyone is experiencing these side effects. Silence hung heavy on the line, broken only by the faint hum of the city in the background. Then, his voice, sharper this time, are you sure about this? Yes, she replied, her voice trembling slightly but firm, I have proof. I can send you the research. The Sheng Corporation headquarters, usually a beacon of calm efficiency, was now a whirlwind of activity. Yanchuan, his initial skepticism replaced by a grim determination, had mobilized his team. Experts were called in, reports were analyzed, and emergency meetings were convened. Wu Yuewei's discovery had sent shockwaves through the company, threatening to derail the Feiyang acquisition and potentially expose Xingshi Group to significant financial and reputational damage. He paced his office, the city lights painting a restless canvas on the glass walls. He hadn't expected this, not from her. He had underestimated her. He glanced at the research she had sent, the meticulous detail, the thorough analysis. A grudging respect began to take root. He called her again. This time, his voice was different. Softer, almost grateful. Wu Yuewei, thank you. You've saved us from a potentially disastrous situation. On the other end of the line, she exhaled, the tension slowly ebbing away. I'm just glad I could help, she whispered, a wave of exhaustion washing over her. He paused, a strange emotion flickering in his chest. Get some rest, he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. We'll talk tomorrow. He hung up, the silence of his office feeling strangely comforting. He looked out at the sprawling cityscape, the lights blurring into a kaleidoscope of colors. He thought of Wu Yuewei, alone in her dorm room, a pregnant college student who had just saved his company. A small, almost involuntary smile touched his lips. He couldn't deny it. She was intriguing. The initial transactional nature of their agreement was beginning to shift, morphing into something more complex. The crystal chandeliers of the grand ballroom cast a shimmering glow, reflecting off the polished marble floors and the expectant faces of the assembled guests. Yanchuan adjusted his cufflinks, a familiar tightness gripping his chest. He'd navigated boardrooms filled with cutthroat rivals and stared down government officials without a flicker of hesitation, yet this felt like facing a firing squad armed with Cupid's arrows. His grandmother, resplendent in a silk cheongsam embroidered with phoenixes, beamed from the front row, her eyes radiating a predatory gleam that sent a shiver down his spine. This wasn't a celebration, it was a carefully orchestrated siege. He'd known this charade was coming. The relentless parade of eligible bachelorettes, the thinly veiled hints about carrying on the Xing legacy, it all pointed to tonight. Lin Keqing, the daughter of a prominent business partner, stood a few feet away, her perfectly coiffed hair gleaming under the lights, a fragile smile playing on her lips. A perfect match, in his grandmother's eyes. A gilded cage, in his. His allergy, the inexplicable reaction that set his body ablaze at a woman's touch, had become his shield, a fortress against the suffocating expectations of his family. But tonight, it felt more like a curse, a cruel twist of fate that kept him isolated in a room full of people. He could practically feel his grandmother's unwavering gaze boring into him, a silent command to play his part. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the performance. This was for the Xing family, for the legacy he was expected to uphold. It was a transaction, not a celebration of love. He'd long resigned himself to that reality. But then, a flicker of movement at the edge of the ballroom caught his eye. Wu Yuewei stood near the service entrance, her small frame almost swallowed by the opulent surroundings. She looked lost, a fawn caught in the headlights of a speeding car. Their earlier encounter, the chaotic collision of his allergy and her unexpected pregnancy, had been a jarring disruption, a rogue element in his carefully controlled life. He'd offered her a deal, a mutually beneficial arrangement that would appease his grandmother and secure her future. It was a pragmatic solution, devoid of any emotional entanglement. Or so he'd thought. He found himself drawn to her, an inexplicable pull that defied logic and reason. Her vulnerability, her quiet strength, her unwavering gaze that met his own without flinching, it was a stark contrast to the carefully constructed facades of the women his grandmother paraded before him. The image of her, alone and uncertain in the midst of the opulent chaos, tugged at something deep within him, a dormant emotion he couldn't quite name. He glanced at Lin Keqing, her expectant smile a stark reminder of the charade he was about to perpetuate. The tightness in his chest intensified, morphing into a suffocating pressure. Suddenly, he knew he couldn't do it. He couldn't go through with the meticulously planned proposal, the hollow pronouncements of love and devotion. It would be a betrayal, not only to himself but to the unexpected flicker of genuine connection he felt with Yue. He excused himself, murmuring apologies to a bewildered Lin Keqing and ignoring his grandmother's increasingly frantic signals. His heart hammered against his ribs as he crossed the ballroom, each step a deliberate rebellion against the life that had been laid out for him. He reached Yue, her eyes widening in surprise as he approached. "Mr. Sheng," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the murmur of the crowd. "Yue," he said, his voice surprisingly steady despite the turmoil within him. I need to talk to you." He led her away from the throng, towards a quiet alcove bathed in the soft glow of a nearby lamp. The silence between them was thick with unspoken words, with the weight of the unconventional circumstances that had brought them together. He took her hand, a tremor running through him as he braced for the familiar burning sensation. But it didn't come. Instead, a strange warmth spread through his veins, a comforting heat that chased away the lingering chill of his carefully constructed isolation. He looked into her eyes, seeing a reflection of his own confusion, his own unexpected yearning. "Did you know," he began, his voice a low rumble that vibrated between them, "I have not believed in love since a long time ago." He paused, searching for the right words, for a way to articulate the emotions that were swirling within him, a tempest he hadn't anticipated. "But I happened to meet you." He squeezed her hand, his gaze locking with hers. "Will you marry me?" The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning, a stark contrast to the carefully rehearsed speech he prepared for Lin Keqing. This wasn't a transaction, it was a plea, a desperate gamble on a future he hadn't dared to imagine. Yue's eyes widened, a mixture of shock and disbelief swirling in their depths. He could see the questions forming in her mind, the doubts and uncertainties that mirrored his own. He waited, his heart pounding against his ribs, the silence stretching into an eternity. A slow smile spread across her lips, transforming her face, illuminating it from within. It was a smile that reached her eyes, a genuine expression of something he couldn't quite decipher, but something that resonated deep within his soul. He watched her, mesmerized, as she nodded, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. He pulled her close, his arms encircling her, the warmth of her body a welcome haven against the chill that had haunted him for so long. He closed his eyes, savoring the feeling, the unexpected joy that bloomed in his chest, pushing aside the carefully constructed walls he'd built around his heart. In the quiet embrace, amidst the echoes of the forgotten celebration, a new chapter began, a story unwritten, a future unknown, but one he was eager to explore, hand in hand with the woman who had inadvertently unlocked the door to his long-dormant heart. The grand ballroom, with its shimmering lights and expectant faces, faded into the background, replaced by the quiet intimacy of the alcove, a sanctuary where two souls, brought together by fate and circumstance, found an unexpected connection, a fragile hope amidst the chaos. The antiseptic scent of the hospital clung to Yue's skin, a stark contrast to the earthy aroma of the tea she craved. She watched the rhythmic rise and fall of the tiny bundle nestled beside her, a surreal calm settling over her despite the whirlwind of the past few months. A son. Sheng Yanchuan's son. The thought still felt foreign, a fragile butterfly fluttering against the cage of her anxieties. He'd been there, Chuanyi, during the birth. Not in the room, of course. His allergy wouldn't permit such proximity. But just outside, Aunt Fong had assured her, a silent sentinel pacing the sterile corridor. He'd even sent in a constant stream of nurses bearing hot towels, soothing words, and assurances that everything would be all right. Would it be, though? This fragile truce, this unconventional arrangement, could it truly blossom into something resembling normalcy? A shadow fell across the doorway, and Yue's heart skipped a beat. It was him. Sheng Yanchuan. He stood there, a stark silhouette against the bright hallway, his usual impeccable suit seeming slightly rumpled, his expression unreadable. He held a small, exquisitely wrapped package. "He's healthy?" he asked, his voice a low rumble, laced with a tension she couldn't quite decipher. "Yes," she whispered, her gaze drifting back to her son. "He's perfect." A wave of exhaustion washed over her, a bone-deep weariness that went beyond the physical. This was it. The beginning of their strange, intertwined lives. A part of her, the pragmatic, survivalist part, felt a surge of relief. She'd secured a future for her child, a life far removed from the precarious existence she'd known. But another part, a small, vulnerable flicker, wondered about the cost. What part of herself would she have to sacrifice in this gilded cage? He stepped closer, cautiously, as if approaching a skittish animal. He extended the package. "A gift," he said, his gaze flitting towards the baby and then quickly away, as if drawn to and repelled by the tiny creature in equal measure. "For him." Yue hesitated for a moment, then accepted the gift. It was a jade pendant, intricately carved with the image of a protective dragon. A traditional symbol of good fortune and strength. She swallowed, the gesture catching in her throat. He was trying. In his own reserved, almost clinical way, he was acknowledging his responsibility, his connection to this child. The realization sent a strange warmth through her, a fragile bud of hope pushing through the hardened soil of her apprehension. Just then, Aunt Fang bustled in, her face beaming. "He's beautiful, Wei Wei. Just like his father." She glanced at Yanchuan, a knowing smile playing on her lips. "Aren't you going to hold your son, Chuanyi?" He stiffened, his hands clenching at his sides. Yue saw the flicker of panic in his eyes, the almost imperceptible tightening of his jaw. He wanted to, she realized. But the fear, the ingrained aversion, held him captive. "Perhaps later," he murmured, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere beyond the window. "I have business to attend to." He turned abruptly and walked out, leaving a palpable silence in his wake. Yue watched him go, a mixture of disappointment and understanding swirling within her. This wouldn't be easy. They had a long, arduous road ahead. But for the first time, she felt a glimmer of something akin to optimism. He hadn't run. He hadn't rejected them outright. That, in itself, was a victory. A few weeks later, life at the Xing estate had settled into a strange rhythm. Yue occupied a separate wing of the sprawling mansion, surrounded by attentive staff and every imaginable comfort. Yanchuan remained a distant figure, a fleeting presence in her life. He would appear occasionally, observing his son from a safe distance, his expression a constant mask of polite detachment. He'd inquire about her well-being, ensure that she had everything she needed, and then retreat back into his own world. One afternoon, as Yue sat in the sun-drenched conservatory, rocking her son, she heard a commotion in the main hall. Voices, raised in argument, filtered through the open doors. It was Mrs. Sheng, her voice sharp and laced with displeasure. "Unacceptable. After all this time, she simply walks back in as if nothing happened." Yue's heart sank. Lin Keqing. Yanchuan's former fiancée, the woman whose sudden disappearance had triggered this entire chain of events. She had returned. Yue felt a cold dread creeping up her spine. What would this mean for her and her son? Would Yanchuan revert back to his old life, discarding them like unwanted baggage? She clutched her son closer, a fierce protectiveness rising within her. She wouldn't let them take him from her. She wouldn't allow them to erase him from existence. She would fight, for him, for their fragile, unconventional family. She rose, her determination hardening her resolve, ready to face whatever storm was brewing. She would confront Mrs. Sheng, confront Lin Keqing, confront Yanchuan himself if necessary. She would not be silenced. She would not be ignored. As she stepped into the hallway, she saw Yanchuan standing before his grandmother, his back ramrod straight, his face etched with a weariness that mirrored her own. "Grandmother," he said, his voice calm but firm, "this is my son. He is a Sheng. And Wei 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 is his mother. That will not change." He turned to meet Yue Wei's gaze, his eyes holding a depth of emotion she'd never seen before. A flicker of acceptance. Perhaps even respect. Mrs. Sheng stared at him, her mouth agape, her usual imperiousness momentarily faltering. She looked at Yue Wei, then at the baby nestled in her arms. A slow, almost imperceptible smile softened her features. "Well then," she said, her voice surprisingly gentle, "come in, child. Let's see this little Sheng." The tension in the room seemed to dissipate, replaced by a fragile, tentative warmth. Yue Wei walked towards them, her son cradled protectively in her arms, a cautious hope blossoming in her heart. Perhaps, just perhaps, they could forge a future, a family, from the ashes of this chaos. The road ahead remained uncertain, fraught with potential pitfalls. But for now, in this moment, they were together. And that, she realized, was all that mattered.